Let's see. All right. So, hi everybody, and welcome to the PlantStock channel. My name is Jesse, if we haven't met before. And today we have Mayur here, who is an research analyst for Zacks. I thought maybe you could introduce yourself.
Yeah. My name is Mayur, and I am an analyst for Zacks Investment Research, and it's a company that, among other things, provides research, commentary, ratings, but also builds software and data systems that are used by professional investors, portfolio managers, analysts at investment management firms. So we make products that are similar to Bloomberg or FactSet if you've heard of those systems before.
Yeah.
We have a similar software platform that allows people to access data on thousands of companies and build, financial models and things like that.
Yeah. All right. And how long have you been investing yourself?
I started actually right. I first joined right when the stock market crashed in 2008. After Lehman went under,
Yeah.
there was that entire weekend where they tried to save Lehman Brothers from collapsing, and those negotiations fell apart. And the next day, on Monday, the stock market opened down. Now it's distant memory now, but it was down 5% in a single day, and that was a crazy time. And that's actually when I started investing, right after the market crashed.
Wow.
So
Perfect
it was nerve
opportunity.
wracking. Yeah, it was perfect opportunity. But back then I was a beginner, so I didn't really know what I was doing. But I started just buying individual, companies, but also just an index fund as well,
Yeah.
mostly.
Yeah.
So I just bought the S&P 500 index fund and just, tried not to look at it every minute.
So, and before we just continue, I thought just show your Twitter page here. Here you have Mayur uh, Thaker, and yeah, you have like 13,400 followers. Is there somewhere else that you normally, uh, you know, talk or show your information?
No, it's mostly Twitter. I also do have an Instagram, which is kind of a separate thing entirely, where I post mostly my food creations.
All right.
I follow a vegan diet, so I always post pictures of food that I've made myself. So it's a entirely different sort of type of followers on my Instagram.
I can imagine.
So,
So I've been thinking about sometimes since I'm a vegan myself that I would maybe either do a separate channel or try to integrate it with this channel, but I'm not sure how popular that would be and how much time I have to do both. But I'm definitely going to look you up there. So I'm
yeah,
guessing there's a lot of Indian meals there.
yeah, it's a mix. So there's some Indian food on there, but really a lot of hybrid creations like vegan lasagna. My own take on Indo-Chinese, which is my personal favorite type of food, a blend of Chinese and Indian flavors together. So yeah, it's kind of a mix of everything.
Awesome, awesome. So my understanding is, as we talked before, that you might be pressed a little for time today. So I thought we could start maybe talking then about Beyond Meat and maybe begin with kind of your bull thesis on the company.
Yeah, so my general investment framework, and this is slide number 3 in the PowerPoint.
Yeah,
I have a general approach to picking stocks, and this is sort of the methodology I kind of follow.
yeah,
I look for companies that have exponential revenue growth and market adoption. But also, there has to be a big total addressable market, right? So we want to see examples of companies that are experiencing rapid growth in revenue, which means that customers are adopting their products, right? That's the clearest and simplest interpretation of what revenue growth means.
yeah,
It means that more and more customers are voting with their money, with their wallets, and endorsing that company's products.
Yeah.
But then also what you want to see is huge runway for continued growth, right? There are examples of companies that have grown rapidly, but then they kind of taper off and they stop growing so rapidly because they've kind of, grown to their max capacity and they haven't innovated enough to be able to expand into new categories. So we want to make sure that we don't fall into that trap. And so therefore there has to be a huge total addressable market that the company is addressing. And it has to be large relative to its enterprise value today,
Yeah.
right? So that's a sort of an idea of valuation, right? How much more runway is there versus how much is being priced in already today? So enterprise value is, market cap plus the total debt that the company has on its balance sheet minus the cash that they have on the balance sheet.
Yeah.
So that gives you the total size of the company. And if that size is huge relative to the total addressable market, then the upside may not be as good, right? Because that means that investors have already priced in a lot of that growth, and therefore, even if they do execute addressable market, the shares may not appreciate that much,
No.
right? So we want a huge gap between total addressable market and the size of the company today,
Yeah.
right? And then also is, and this is sort of going hand in hand with that, which is that the company has to be solving a major pain point or cutting costs in some way.
Yeah.
There has to be something that they're doing that's improving the situation versus how it is today. Or if they're cutting costs, or there could be other things too, like just increasing total satisfaction for customers, increasing utility for customers, making things easier for customers. One of those things have to be there. Because if it's not, then the exponential revenue growth that you did see could just be a market fad, right? It could be a temporary thing where a bunch of people are interested in it right now, and then it kind of dies out,
Well,
right? Even if the total
I guess that's how Beyond Meat is handling the situation, making it easier for people to try to eat more plant-based. Maybe not necessarily going full vegan, but knowing that most people eat meat and enjoy meat, and they'll make it a simple meat-like product that they'll enjoy. I'm guessing that's why they could have such a great future part of it.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And that's where I see Beyond Meat kind of satisfying multiple requirements there because they're not only solving a major pain point, right? And we're going to take a look at that, where the existing system of the meat industry is unsustainable,
Yeah.
both environmentally, ethically, and health wise
Yeah.
as well, all three of them. And we're seeing study after study talk about the effect of red meat on things like heart disease, and other issues as well with regards to health. And not only that, but it also fits into this idea of unsustainable damage to the environment.
Yeah.
And now I know that there are I've interacted with a few folks on Twitter about this as well, where people disagree with that. And yes, there are, counterpoints as well regarding, meat production and how it can be sustainable. And yeah, I will concede the fact that meat production can be sustainable. There are methods to make and produce meat in a much more environmentally sustainable way. But ultimately, we haven't seen that approach scale.
Yeah.
So there are scores and scores of very small organic farms
Yeah.
that do produce organically produced meat, sustainably raised beef and chicken and other livestock, but they haven't hit scale.
No.
The
Well,
vast majority of meat,
my understanding
yeah,
is
the vast,
also that if you actually made it organic and everyone in the US actually ate organic meat, then it would actually require a lot more land mass. That would, and the US in itself wouldn't be enough to actually fill that demand.
exactly, and that's another major issue there.
Mm.
So that's a major pain point that Beyond Meat is addressing is the trifecta there of health issues, environmental issues, and also cutting costs too. So this has been an issue at the core of Beyond Meat CEO Ethan Brown. He said this multiple times over the years in various interviews, And even in the most recent Q3 earnings call, he reiterated this point where, there's three factors that go into succeeding for Beyond Meat: taste, nutrition, and cost.
Yeah.
If they can get those three all aligned, then they have a very strong chance at grabbing a big portion of that total addressable market.
Yeah.
They can get the taste right, which they're working on and they have done a great job of, especially with the Beyond Burger. If they can get nutrition right, I believe already on point. And by the way, there's a lot of fun uncertainty, doubt about Beyond Meat's processed nature. But now they're working on a comprehensive study from Stanford University to finally put that to rest.
Yeah.
And they're running a clinical trial, a wide-scale clinical trial to understand the impact of Beyond Meat on people's health, with the control group being those who consume red meat.
Yeah.
And so we should see the results of that coming out by 2024. But the University of Michigan have already done a much smaller scale study, and they found that people that have consumed Beyond Meat versus the control group, which is red meat eaters, have significant reductions in heart disease risk factors,
Yeah.
such as TMAO.
That trial was actually sponsored by Beyond Meat to some extent.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, so that is an important thing to make sure everyone understands. Just for disclosure, it was sponsored by Beyond Meat. So the trial was financed by Beyond Meat, but of course, the study itself is irrespective of who funded it. And now Stanford is going to conduct a much more comprehensive trial that provides even more conclusive evidence on the effect of Beyond Meat on people's health.
But the good thing is that even though Beyond Meat sponsored one of those analyses themselves, if you look at the meta-analysis when it comes to plant-based food on an international scale, they're all pointing to the same fact that when it comes to heart diseases, when it comes to different kinds of cancers, normally you are actually getting way more protected than a typical standard American diet.
Exactly, and that's the thing is that the use case of Beyond Meat extends so much more beyond being a replacement to, say, organic meat, right? I guess you can make that argument that raised grass-fed beef doesn't have the same issues that typical red meat does.
Yeah.
But remember, the vast majority of the world does not eat, or at least in the U.S., I should say, and many other parts of the world too, does not have sustainably raised grass-fed organic meat. Right? They consume whatever is most affordable, and for them, the most affordable thing is factory-farmed, high-volume meat.
Yeah.
Which is low grade.
So let me know on the slides if I should move on to a certain page.
Yeah, so I was just going through what Beyond Meat is doing in terms of addressing that major pain point.
Yep.
But also,
I think he disappeared there temporarily. I'm hoping he'll probably just call in soon again. We'll see. Guys, okay, let's see. Yep, you're back.
Oh, I'm back. Yeah, for some reason I got kicked out. Yeah, so the other thing to also keep an eye on is the first mover advantage, runaway network effects, right? And Beyond Meat has that first mover advantage. There are others as well, like Impossible, who has been involved in this category as well. But Beyond Meat, as far as we know, and we still don't know much about Impossible in terms of their finances.
No.
But Beyond Meat is the volume leader, and they also have the best brand recognition overall in the category. So I think that they check off that box as well.
Yeah.
And then, a strong return on invested capital. This is an important point that the best investors of, ever, such as Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, Peter Lynch, all of those guys have focused on this item as an important point to maximize returns when you're an investor.
Yeah.
And right now, Beyond Meat doesn't have ROIC because they don't have profitability just yet. but there are methods you can use to approximate that, and we can look at that later on. But I also do believe that they do have strong returns on invested capital versus the existing meat production companies such as Tyson. Tyson is one of the biggest chicken producers in the U.S., and I believe that they have better, margins. First and foremost, better gross margins,
Yeah.
and also gross profit relative to total invested capital is much better for Beyond Meat versus Tyson. So
It's
that's
normally
an
like
important point.
30% for Beyond Meat normally, right?
Yeah, yeah. 30% gross margin is roughly where they were at. It's fallen below that recently just because they had a little bit of issues, especially in Q3 of this
Yeah.
year, which was a really bad quarter overall. But I think it's a one-off, and we can talk about that as well. But overall, I believe that, yes, they do have better gross margins and better potential ROIC versus established food companies of today.
Yeah.
And there's some important points on as to why that is. I believe Beyond Meat is much more capital light versus Tyson and versus all of the other meat producing companies, because meat production requires a lot of assets, a lot of invested capital.
Yeah.
It requires a lot of recurring, cost as well. Whereas Beyond Meat can produce the same amount of output with a fraction of the assets.
Yeah.
Because it's just so much leaner, which without requiring so much land, like you mentioned as well.
Yeah, it's normally like what, depending on how you measure, it's like 1/10 of when it comes to water, and even I think when it comes to water it's even more, but land use, and when it comes to the produce that you use to you actually eat the food directly instead of giving it to the cow or the chickens. So I mean, much more
Exactly.
efficient, and yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's much more, resource efficient, much more natural resources efficient, and yeah, land efficient, and also asset efficient
Yeah.
as well. So we'll see that. Also, reasonable valuation, right? And that's a key point there. As an investor, it has to have a reasonable valuation, and we can walk through an example of that. And then, one of my favorites is number 7, which is pessimistic short-term market sentiment. And I think that's where we're at right now, with Beyond Meat. The shares are hitting, 52-week low. The market is fairly bearish on the prospects of
and
the
that's what
company
we
right
want to
now.
see, right? We want to see that as a long-term investor, because we want those kind of prices to really go all in if we could.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you can take advantage of that, right? Because now, expectations are lowered. And so when they have been lowered, it makes our jobs easier to be right in the long run.
Yeah.
And so that's where we're seeing with Beyond Meat right now, with shares hitting, in the 70s right now versus in the 150s not too long ago. So, for all these reasons, I think Beyond Meat is a major, company to watch. And I have, a personal interest in this because I do own shares of Beyond Meat, directly. So now my cost basis is much higher. It's at 135.
It's like me.
So I'm underwater on it.
Bleeding.
Now the thing is, I went into that knowing that this could happen because Wall Street has been pretty nice to Beyond Meat because the shares trade at a very rich multiple. Now it's gone down significantly now, but it still, has on a gross profit multiple, the shares trade at roughly 40 times, which is high, right? Which is definitely high.
Yeah.
We need to see 30% plus growth to, substantiate a 40 multiple on gross profit. It needs to be north of that. So right now, as of Q3, the company has grown year over year by roughly 20%.
Yeah.
So it has slowed. The growth has definitely slowed, and that's why market sentiment is bearish right now. But I still think that because of these long-term, first principles approach of thinking, that I think growth will pick up, and it's going to pick up because of what they've got in the pipeline. And so if we go to the next slide here, slide number 4, we can just see a quick chart of Beyond Meat's growth rate. It's had, a CAGR of 27% from 2018 to 2022, and the green bars are estimates from analysts right now. So we saw a little bit of a slowdown in 2021 versus 2020, but still pretty good growth overall. And keep in mind that's off of a very high base, because 2020 was a very bizarre year, right? Since the world was under lockdown.
Yeah.
And companies like Beyond Meat actually experienced huge growth that year because everybody was stocking their fridges,
Yeah.
with groceries. So we saw a huge explosion in Beyond Meat sales for 2020.
Especially in retail.
So the fact, especially in retail,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. So for those who aren't familiar, Beyond Meat reports three segments: U.S. retail, U.S. or food service, and international.
Yeah.
So U.S. retail, U.S. food service, and international. Food service meaning restaurants, right? And
Yeah.
international, which combines both retail and restaurants. So U.S. retail as well as international retail had huge growth last year versus 2019. So the fact that they still grew by about 20% in 2021 is, to me, still a pretty good achievement because, again, that 2020 benchmark was a very high watermark to start off with.
Hmm.
So I think the more relevant number would be to look at the 2-year CAGR, which is north of about 40%. So that's still very good growth overall, and we can see that growth is expected to reaccelerate next year in 2022, and I think that's going to materialize because of a number of partnerships that Beyond Meat is working on with restaurants.
Yes, a lot of my subscribers are wondering about if BTIG's analyst Peter Saleh is correct that we could see like maybe 12, 13,000 new McDonald's locations in the US next year.
I really hope that's the case. Yeah, I really hope that happens. Beyond McDonald's also, people think that Beyond Meat is dependent on McDonald's and McDonald's doesn't need Beyond Meat. Um, that might be true to a certain extent, but if you look at a chart of McDonald's revenues, they've been going down for the last 10 years. So McDonald's to juice that revenue growth because they've had negative revenue growth for 10 years now.
Well, that's
So
why they're
although
probably
they
interested in new markets like Beyond and plant-based food.
exactly,
Mm.
exactly. So I think if McDonald's was smart, they would do this. They would they would launch it nationwide. Because remember, their competitor Burger King already has done this with Impossible,
Yeah.
right? With the Impossible Whopper.
Yeah.
So if McDonald's really wanted to see, or at least have something that can juice that, that they should move forward with that. And on the next slide at number 5, this is another key thing to note as well, which is directly from their quarterly letters. This is very important because as a niche, right now it's a niche company.
Yeah.
They have very strong brand awareness. And this leads all, sort of plant-based meat category. Unaided brand awareness, which is the most important thing, 26%. That's huge. That means 1 out of every 4 people think of Beyond Meat first when you say plant-based meat.
Yeah.
Right? When you tell them plant-based meat, what comes to your mind first? 1 out of 4 people say Beyond Meat, and then with a little bit of assistance, like 60, that number jumps to 60%. So that's important to know, and that's going to be something that McDonald's will look at as well, I think, and say when customers are aware of this specific brand, that's the one that they should sign with. And I believe Beyond Meat has the production capacity to meet the demand that might come with a huge order from McDonald's.
Yeah, probably the only plant-based company at this moment that would have the kind of facilities to meet that.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think,
and see, that's another thing too.
and the interesting thing is,
That's
oh, sorry, you go.
sorry. That's an important point too, because a lot of folks say that, well, when they go to their grocery store, they see 20 options, right, for plant-based meat, right? So why Beyond Meat? And that's true, but remember, this exists for every category of food out there. there's always multiple players in every market. That doesn't mean that one particular brand won't outperform another. So it's important that we see metrics like this, where we see Beyond Meat be the leader of brand awareness,
Yeah.
but also even more important than that is production capacity. And right now, nobody has the production capacity that Beyond Meat has when it comes to producing plant-based meat.
Yeah.
Impossible is probably the closest to one, and we're going to find out, because I think they are moving closer towards IPO
Yeah.
on what their production is.
Mm.
But no one has that production capacity that Beyond Meat does, and so they're ready more than anyone else to scale production to meet huge demand,
Yeah.
rather than being in niche products and niche grocery stores.
Exactly. So, and the interesting thing is that there's been a talk, about a year now, before we found out about the McDonald's deal, that it wasn't supposed to be a branded affiliation. But I've heard some subscribers saying that the restaurants in the US where they've seen, I think it was in California, they could see on the menu it said Beyond Meat. So I'm kind of uncertain. What do you think? Is it if it becomes even bigger in the US, will it be branded? Because it seems to be branded in Europe.
Yeah, I think for smaller restaurants, they may want to brand it with Beyond Meat. But I think the larger players like McDonald's are going to want to white label it for
Mm.
themselves, because they want the product to be unique to them.
Yeah.
Because if they're just going to sell Beyond Meat burgers, then why would someone go to McDonald's when they can just buy it themselves or something like that?
Yeah.
It's just, I think the bigger players want to make it under their own in-house brand. And smaller ones, because they don't have that sort of branding power, they would utilize the brand recognition and brand value of Beyond Meat
Yeah.
to advertise Beyond Meat. So I think it's going to be a mix of both.
Yeah.
So you can see, like, on slide 6, there's that total addressable market, and this was taken from Barclays. They published this today, and they expect that plant-based meat is going to grow to 10% market share by by the end of this decade.
Mm.
So again, that's that huge total addressable market that Beyond Meat is playing in, and as the brand leader, and as the production leader, I think that they will achieve a plurality of market share, by the end of this decade. So if the market opportunity is 140 billion, and if they can maintain market share that they have today, that is a staggering opportunity.
Yeah.
For Beyond Meat. That could mean revenues of 20 to 40 billion dollars.
Yeah, it's enough with 20%, and it'll be about 30.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So
And Beyond Meat, and Ethan Brown has been on the record to say this. On slide 7, I just took a direct quote from him. He said, "If you can get the taste right, you deliver superior nutrition and you underprice."
Yeah.
Right? That's the trifecta that they're working on. We think we can take a very large section of that 1.4 trillion animal protein market.
Yeah.
So that's the idea here, and I love that Ethan Brown thinks this way, because he's thinking from first principles reasoning.
Yeah.
Delivering superior nutrition, getting the taste right, and underpricing. Right? If we can get those three things aligned, then there's no reason why they cannot grab a significant share of that huge, animal protein market, specifically because of the problems that they are addressing.
Yeah.
Right?
So,
with the environmental issues, the health issues, those are two huge things that they're solving.
yeah.
So if they can get these three things right, then they should win that market share.
It was kind of like the Tesla growth story, the same kind of key components there. But
Exactly.
I keep talking about that, though, that I'm probably piss off people when I say that. But to me, to some extent, and obviously I'm biased being vegan, but my understanding of the whole environmental issue and sustainability is that meat is the bigger issue, and dairy, which means that I feel they're solving actually a much larger problem. And I always say also that when it comes to cars, most people, it's not a necessity, right? I mean, it's a convenience. It's good to, and to some extent, maybe necessary for many people. But eating is something that is a necessity for most people, like 3 to 5 times a day. So in that way, I feel this is a much more important mission. But obviously, both of them are important. And I am invested in Tesla as well.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah, absolutely. And that's why, like if, on slide 10, right, I just, cited a few studies here.
Mm.
Red meat consumption has been linked to colon cancer, to diabetes, to heart disease.
Yeah.
And these are not people on Twitter talking about this. This is published by the Cleveland Clinic. It's published by WebMD, and also Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine.
Yeah.
So these are, academic publications, and the facts are just in.
Yeah.
And yes, there are ways to mitigate that by eating more responsibly sourced meat. I do kind of concede that idea, but again, as I said, we haven't seen organic meat scale, to a point where they can actually afford organic meat versus regular, meat. So no one has been able to scale that type of sustainably raised livestock to the point where people can afford it. Beyond Meat is the only one that's doing it and working on cost at the same time. That's priority number one,
Yeah.
tied with taste and nutrition.
Exactly.
So that's the sort of the pain point that Beyond Meat is solving. So again, if they can solve that, getting that taste right, getting the nutrition right, which I believe is already achieved,
Mm.
and then getting cost down, then because they're solving that pain point, I believe that they should garner significant market share.
Was it
And on slide
2024?
Mhm.
Mm. There
Yeah,
is
by 2024. Yeah.
exactly.
That's the target. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
been the target for a year now, and I think and beyond and Ethan Brown just reiterated that again on the Q3 earnings
Yeah.
call.
I did.
There was a question by an analyst, and he responded saying that yeah, he feels really good about that in the next 2.5 years. So that's huge. If they can get that cost down to roughly $4 per pound,
Yeah.
which is roughly in line with what beef costs today, that would be a tremendous inflection point, where people would start to say, okay, well, this tastes good. It's better for me. It's better for the environment. Why not do it?
Yeah.
And I think more companies will start to endorse that as well.
Definitely.
And the same thing goes with not just health but environmental damage too. You can see on slide 11. Um, you know, Food is a major contributor to greenhouse gases. The meat industry, that is. So if you combine, these top five meat producers, JBS is the biggest in the world. Tyson is number two. Cargill number three. They emit as much greenhouse gas emissions as ExxonMobil does. You know, this is a study done by a nonprofit organization called The Counter. So again, this is a huge problem that we're staring at right here, not just from a health point of view, but from an environmental point of view. Livestock do generate tremendous amounts of methane, which still exists in the environment, but not to the degree that it would if we weren't producing and eating this much meat.
Right.
And if you compare that to, say, how much carbon emissions are generated from a Beyond Burger, right? And that's on slide number 13. This was directly published by University of Michigan, and it found that beef patty, the total greenhouse gas emissions on that unit of measurement was 3.7 for a beef patty and 0.4 for a Beyond Burger.
Yeah.
So this is significant reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, and also a significant reduction in energy use.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not just the cows that are emitting, emissions, but it's the energy used in the production and processing of meat and the distribution of meat that's also, a contributing factor to greenhouse gases.
Yeah.
So overall, these are all sort of the first principles as to the why behind why should Beyond Meat succeed. We've got the health point of view, and then we've got the environmental point of view.
Yeah.
And ultimately, cows are just intelligent animals, right?
Yeah.
We as a society, it's interesting why we protect dogs and cats, right? But we don't protect cows, even though cows are demonstrated to be just as intelligent as dogs and cats are.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
so it's inhumane, as the third point, to be slaughtering these animals for food when we could survive off of plant protein, and not just survive but thrive
Yeah,
off of plant protein.
I think
You know,
actually,
so
I think Game Changers that came out about 2 years ago, talking about how professional athletes could live as a vegan and still do really well, if not even better. Kind of talks about the science about that. Basically, where do cows get their protein from? Basically, everything comes from plants from the beginning, anyhow, and from the soil. So it's a weird argument when we think we have to get it through meat.
yeah, exactly, exactly. And if we jump up to slide number 24, this is directly from their website. But
Yeah,
again, it sums up the value proposition of Beyond Meat, right? It's 99% less water usage in the production of these of Beyond Beef, right? 90% fewer greenhouse gas emissions, 93% less land, 46% less energy. So, if you can, again, going back to Beyond Ethan Brown, if you can get the taste, nutrition, and cost right, it makes sense for them to grab significant market share from the establishment, from
yeah,
the status quo, because they've improved, resource consumption and energy consumption to such a great degree that it doesn't make sense, or it makes perfect sense as to why someone would, pay to this. Um, Unless if you just really are put off by the taste, which is, I think, a small minority of people. I think most people that have tried Beyond Burger love it.
yeah,
Very few people don't like it. If you don't like it, that's fine. But even if the folks that actually liked it were to consume it more regularly versus red meat,
yeah,
that itself would be 10 times greater revenue than what Beyond Meat can do today,
yeah.
is doing today, I should say.
And I think it's also important to really point out when it comes to the price parity, how what a game changer that is and how important it is. Because I do believe that people, Gen Zs and millennials, they're probably the generations that are going to care more about the animals. They're going to care more about their health. They're more up to date, and they care more about sustainability. But in the end, it's always about that buck, right? About money. And we've seen that in Sweden so many times that at times here, when the price of meat goes up, people all of a sudden starts eating way healthier. They start eating much more fruits, or especially more vegetarian, cheaper versions, like eating beans and rice and lentils and things like that. But as long as it comes down, with subsidies, maybe that's something we could talk about either today or another time. I think the subsidies is one of the reasons why we have the world we have today, right? So,
Yeah,
mm,
absolutely. I
mm,
know. And that's the other thing too, is that um, you know if we can solve this problem, right, which is this meat production problem,
yeah,
um, that is an opportunity that rivals the environmental damage that autos present today.
yeah,
Right, the transportation industry is the number one contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, and countless people die from cancer that's induced by inhaling fumes that are emitted from cars.
yeah,
And so that's why Tesla is such an interesting comparison to Beyond Meat in terms of what they're doing. I think Beyond Meat is basically taking the Tesla playbook, which is you know first and foremost innovating to the point where they've produced a product that's appealing and that people actually want, right? But then number two is getting that cost down. Because remember, in the early days, Tesla, the average selling price of a Tesla was $100,000 plus when they only
exactly.
sold the Model S.
Yeah,
And then the Model X came on. Model X was even more pricey than the Model S,
yeah,
right? The SUV. But then, Elon Musk said, well, this is not where we want to be. Like, if we want to be the Ferrari of the world, or like a Bentley, we're not going to move the needle on changing greenhouse gas emissions. It's not the mission of Tesla to stick to just the premium high end market. We want to make this a mass market company,
yeah,
and to do that, they have to significantly invest in production to drive down costs and to continuously innovate as well. So it's not just mass production, but it's also coming up with new ways to make the car cheaper to produce,
Yeah.
right? And so we've seen Tesla continuously iterate on factory design, on the design and engineering of the vehicle itself, and on innovation on battery cells, right? And so they've got this new battery cell called the 4680 cell, which is going to be significantly cheaper to produce versus how cells are produced today.
Yeah.
And so down that cost curve through innovation and through mass production, economies of scale, then they can achieve that end goal. And that same exact approach is what Ethan Brown is following with continuous innovation, continuous iteration
Yeah.
to make these products tastier, um, and continuous increasing in investments to increase production.
And that's actually
And that's why I saw that.
and that's something that some of my subscribers asked about. Like, what if Beyond Meat stopped with their R&D right now? I mean, there wouldn't be such a big loss then, right? But they do understand the same principle that as Elon Musk, that if you keep reinvesting, eventually you will get those margins up even more, and you will have the perfect product that everyone wants. And I think it's a win-win in the long term. But yeah, you have to be patient.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm.
And I think with Beyond Meat, I think the pipeline is strong for 2022. I'm actually pretty bullish on 2022 overall. Like we've already talked about the McDonald's partnership. The other thing too is the Panda Express partnership, which is going quite well.
Yeah.
I just had a friend of mine in Chicago visit a Panda Express and try it out, and he loved it. And he talked to the manager, and the manager's like, "Yeah, we sell out of this, weekly. Every couple of days, we're sold out."
Yeah.
So I hope that bodes well for the Panda Express rollout as
It's a
well.
couple of
Going,
thousand places, isn't it?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's the biggest Asian inspired food service restaurant in the U.S.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how big they are internationally, but at least
Uh,
in the U.S., it's the largest Asian restaurant.
it's 2,200 locations.
Right.
So it's pretty big. I would say definitely.
Yeah, it's pretty big.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then also what's fascinating is this Pepsi partnership too, that which they announced earlier this year.
Yeah.
But they've been very silent about that because that's something out of that's something that I never expected because you when you think of Pepsi, you think of snacks and drinks,
Yeah.
and that's not a category that Beyond Meat typically has talked about entering. But that remains to be an interesting sort of avenue where if Beyond Meat can get into that market,
With that kind of
Pepsi
distribution.
is yeah,
Mm.
Pepsi is one of the biggest food companies in the world,
Right.
and if they start to offer plant-based snacks and drinks,
Yeah.
like taking Doritos and making that a veganized item,
Beef
or any
jerky.
of their other exactly,
Mm.
yeah. So again, that represents yet another huge opportunity for Beyond Meat
Yeah.
to radically expand the product portfolio.
So before, because I know time is getting short, when it comes to PepsiCo thing, I keep wondering what they mean about plant-based drinkables. I keep wondering if they would move in with PepsiCo to make some kind of dairy products with time, because and just like a couple of months after the PepsiCo deal, they started a trademark for Beyond Milk. So I think that's keeps me wondering what there is down their pipes, right? So
Yeah,
but what I was wondering is also what you've stated on Twitter not long ago, that we know, like you stated before, that Ethan Brown believes that this could be a 40 billion revenue company, right? And that would basically be 100x from the last year's revenue, right?
right.
And that, what do you see of when it comes to those possibilities in the next 10, 20
Yeah, so
years?
that's yeah, it's absolutely mind blowing. But like we saw the total addressable market chart just now, right? The overall market is $1.4 trillion.
Yeah.
So achieving $40 billion of revenue is not a tall order.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a very large number relative to today, but when you look at the market opportunity, it's not that hard to achieve.
No.
It's just like Tesla with autos, right? The auto market is similar in size, 1.2 to 1.4 trillion.
Yeah.
So for Tesla to achieve 10 million units per year, it's not a big order. I
No.
mean, it's possible, right? So I still think that Beyond Meat has a little bit to go with regards to that before they can get there, specifically with getting cost down.
Yeah.
If they can get that cost down to achieve cost parity, I think there's nothing stopping them from achieving of $40 billion. So from a valuation standpoint, right, as investors, that's what we're interested in. Even if they achieve half of that, let's say if they do $20 billion in revenue,
Mm.
um, and if they have a price to sales multiple of 3 times, which I think is very reasonable, because most food companies have a price to sales multiple of 1 time,
Mm.
but I think that Beyond Meat, because they consume significantly fewer resources, they will have gross margins that significantly beat the meat industry average.
Yeah.
So I think they will command a price multiple that's higher than the industry average.
Yeah.
Just like Tesla will command a multiple higher than the industry average because of the higher growth and because of the higher capital efficiency.
Right.
I think a 3 times price to sales is very reasonable.
So 60
So that would
billion.
give us,
Mm.
yeah, 20
Yeah.
billion in revenue,
Mm.
3 times revenue. That would give us a market cap of $60 billion, versus today the market cap is around 5 billion.
Yeah.
So that would be a 12 bagger, right, over the next 8 to 9 years or so,
Yeah.
um, which is a phenomenal return, and
Yeah.
that's assuming $20 billion in revenue, half of what Ethan Brown is expecting.
Yeah.
Um,
But
so
I
if it's a
keep
bigger
wondering,
multiple,
when it comes to multiple price to sales there, I'm wondering still in 10 years that if they couldn't actually have it even higher, given the innovation and given, like you said, the margins. And I mean, the whole market is going to be far from saturated, right? So, and then when we're talking about that, they're looking at the $1.4 trillion meat industry. When you look at Credit Suisse in 20 to 30 years, that's what they consider the whole plant-based industry to be, $1.4 trillion, right? So it's, to me, it seems almost the possibilities there are limitless almost.
yeah, it's just a phenomenal opportunity. I think the future will be a hybrid of like plant-based meat. There's also talk about cultured meat, and then of course organic meat. Something's going to have to be done with regards to how meat is produced today, and
Mm.
it's not going to look like how it is today because it
No,
can't. It
it
cannot
definitely.
continue that way.
Yeah.
The damage is too great, and if you just watch documentaries after documentaries about this, or if you watch Seaspiracy on Netflix,
Wonderful.
the damage that's being done to the earth
Yeah.
from meat production as well as seafood production is just mind blowing.
Yeah.
And something has to be done to stop it. And Beyond Meat, in my view, is the one company that's doing the most to address that.
Yeah. And
Um,
even if impossible would become stronger and stronger, I don't think that's necessarily a negative thing, because since the market is still so young, the more stronger companies we have there out there, I mean, the more people are going to be aware about plant-based living and the possibilities. It's going to be beneficial for everyone. So I'm not worried about that. But also, I'm thinking constantly, again, with Tesla, with escape velocity, seeing the way Ethan Brown moves internationally now, like placing all the factories in different countries, in the Netherlands, in Europe, and then in 2 places in China. I mean, eventually, when they get everything working, it's just going to fly like that in my eyes. I mean, obviously, a lot of
yeah,
things can go wrong, but I do feel that they're on the right track.
absolutely great on R&D, and that's the other distinguishing factor too for Beyond Meat. Just continuously iterate on taste, right? Getting that mouthfeel experience that beef and chicken provide. They've continuously iterated on that, and for why they do have a moat versus other plant-based meats out there, is that they simply beat most of everyone else on taste and texture,
Yeah.
and that's not sitting still. It's not sitting idle, right? We already saw Beyond Burger version 3 come out this year,
And
and
talk
people
about
say that it's
the
already,
fourth, maybe next year, actually, already.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and they're getting closer and closer to it. There's a slide actually that It's again, it's directly from, slide number 14 is directly from their quarterly letter. You can see under the microscope what the Beyond sausage looks like versus what a traditional pork sausage looks like, and you can see that the strands of protein, of the two are very, very similar.
Yeah.
And they're getting there.
Yeah.
So, Beyond Meat employs over 50 food scientists, by the way. So this is a science company, a food tech company, at its core,
And
which
total
they're
200
continuously.
researchers, don't they?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So there's an entire R&D team. Yeah, so they have a very large R&D budget, and they're showing it, right?
Yeah.
Because they're continuously improving on that taste and texture.
Yeah.
So eventually, there's going to be a point where they achieve not only price parity, but also taste parity with
Yeah.
beef, in my view. And it's getting closer and closer. We see that progress there.
And then for a whole nother video, probably would be the chicken alternatives being probably an even greater market, because Americans and most Westerners, they since the 70s started eating way more chicken, believing that would be healthier. We know today that is actually not that true. But so people moving away from chicken, eating a better alternative there. And there really hasn't been any good alternative, not as long as I haven't eaten meat for 20 years. But my understanding is that if anyone can do a bit, like almost perfect replica with time when it comes to chicken, it'll be Beyond Meat.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's the one to go.
Yeah. All right, man. So I know again you're pressed for time. Is there something you would want to finish with here before we let you go?
Yeah, no, I just again, the broad arching idea is that there's a big problem out there,
Mm.
and is attempting to solve it. And if they can get that taste and texture right of beef and chicken, just purely from plants,
Yeah.
and if they can improve health, reduce environmental damage, reduce cost, and save animals in the process, why wouldn't it win, right? That's my final question that I would leave everyone with.
Yeah.
You mimic the taste and texture of beef. It's great for you. It's great for the environment, and it costs the same, and it saves animals. Why shouldn't it win?
Yeah. You
And so that's the future that I'm betting on.
solve a problem with people who are not ready. Most people, we're complacent. We want it to be as easy as possible. We can't make huge changes. We're so stressed. If we have a product that's already healthier for us and better for the planet and better for the animals, and it's going to be cheaper, I think that's an absolute winner in the long term. So definitely.
Absolutely.
All right.
Let's check back into this in a year from now. Hopefully, hopefully we're right.
Definitely.
So I think we will be.
Again, thanks a lot, Mayur. And I'm hoping we can talk more again when we have more time, and then maybe have some subscriber questions. And again, really thankful that you had the time to come here. Thank you.
Sounds good. Great. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.